Welcome to the Casey Zavaleta podcast. This podcast is for those who are in pursuit of high performance and for those who are interested in living with intentionality. We'll explore the practices, habits, and mindsets that will help you to be better in your personal life and in your professional life. Your time and attention is a gift that I promise not to take for granted. Thank you for being here. Time. Something that is incessantly measured and managed, and yet something that is best experienced when it's not measured or managed at all. We think of a second as a second, a minute as a minute, an hour as an hour, as if each second, minute, and hour is the same length. If that is the case, why is it that some years fly by? Why is it that some minutes feel as though they drag on forever? How is it that entire lives flash before our eyes in seconds, compressed down to mere moments? We wish some days would go away, and we wish some would stay forever. In the moment, events feel long, and yet in our memories, they seem so short, a distant past. Time, something that we think of as linear and structured, controlled by clocks and calendars, and yet something that we experience as warped and fluid. Time is the ultimate holder of these short, beautiful lives that we live. Or are they long, beautiful lives that we live? Time is the ultimate holder, yet somehow our lives are most purely experienced when time is not the holder of them at all. Today on the podcast, we are talking about time, something that's been on my mind a lot lately. I think because motherhood and the experience of watching a new life come to be, well, I guess feeling a new life come to be during pregnancy, and then witnessing a new life grow and develop is the ultimate warp of time. They say that in parenthood, the days feel long and the years feel short. And so far in my experience, that idea definitely rings true. It feels like the exact moment and phase that you're in is going to last forever. And then you look back and you think, where did the time go? I wonder if it's not just motherhood that this phenomenon exists in. It's not just parenthood. Although time is this massive and driving force in our lives, right? Something that feels like it has a hold on us and has a hold on our experiences. I wonder if the thing that transcends it is love. So in those moments of purest, deepest connection, which I felt so much in motherhood so far, I wonder if that's the thing that takes us beyond this structured and linear version of time that exists and takes us into something beyond the constructs of time. That's all really conceptual and gives you an idea of why I've been wanting to talk about this subject. But I want you to know that today, the goal is going to be to talk about time in different scales. We're going to start down at a micro scale. We're going to start by talking about mere moments, and then we'll expand out as we work through this episode until we speak about years and decades. And what I want you to take away from this episode is an idea of how you can use your time more intentionally. That might mean being more productive, but that might also just mean filling your time with more fulfillment and more satisfaction. It doesn't necessarily mean we're squeezing every ounce of productivity out of the hours, minutes, and seconds that we have in a day. So again, my hope is that it makes you think, It makes you reflect on how you use your time, where your time goes. And I hope that at the end of this episode, you can make some different choices that help you to use your time even more intentionally. So let's start off and let's talk about moments, these small moments. They really are all that we have at the end of the day. That is our experience of life and of time. All we have is this moment and this one and this one. Life is experienced in moments, nothing more. So maybe never lose sight of the importance of these small moments. A breath, a held breath, a look that you exchange with someone, a touch, a feeling that you get in your being, a pause before something takes place, the leap that you take when you start something off. These are the moments that, strung together, make up our experience of life. And so if being fully present in the moment, which means you're not distracted, you're not thinking about other things, you are just truly, fully experiencing the now. If that's something that is challenging for you, I encourage you to work on your presence in the small moments. Notice when you feel fully dialed in, and notice when you have trouble and when you're seemingly thinking, ruminating on past things that have happened, or you're planning out the future. I encourage you, if that's challenging for you, to try to work in pauses into your day that you can really just fully be present. You can feel the sensations in your body at that moment. This concept that I'm talking about might sound a lot like meditation, might sound a lot like mindfulness. Yes, it is all of those things. If experiencing a moment is challenging for you, I encourage you to think about working a practice like that into your life. It doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't mean that you have to sit and meditate for 30 minutes a day. It might just be that you have a little notification that goes off on your phone 1, 2, or 3 times a day. And when that notification goes off, you bring your brain to exactly what is going on in this moment. You feel your body, you feel your breath, and you just allow yourself to be here in the now. It's a powerful practice. And again, it doesn't take much. You don't have to overblow this. But I hope when I think about moments that we never in our planning and thinking brains zoom out so far and concentrate so much on this narrative, on the storyline of our lives in a way that makes us lose the present moments. If we scale up a little bit in duration from our moments, then we end up at hours. And hours are interesting because they can feel so long and they can feel so short, depending on what it is that you're doing. The main thing that I want to consider when we think about hours is getting into a flow state. A flow state is that state that you're in where you're not thinking about the passage of time, where it can feel like hours pass by in mere seconds. You've completely lost track of time and you are just fully immersed in whatever it is that you're doing. It's the moment when you realize that you've been so deep in the weeds with something that you look up and you completely forgot to eat and you miss lunch. Not that that's a great thing, but that would be because you're in a flow state. It's that moment when you're doing a physical activity and you're so ingrained in it that you have no idea if it's been 30 minutes or 2 hours. This flow state is a beautiful thing to reach, and there's been lots of research done on how do we get ourselves into that flow state, because it really is a beautiful way to experience time. What we've learned is that the most surefire way to enter a flow state when you're working on a certain task is by having this matchup of the challenge level and your skill level. So let's use the example of cards. Let's say that we're playing that one game called War, where you just have a stack of cards and you flip over a card against your opponent, and whoever has the higher card wins. That's a very low challenge game. If you have the skills to play more complex and more complicated card games, you're going to be bored. That would be an example of a low challenge game that your skills far exceed. You're not going to get into a flow state that way. However, let's think of another game. So let's say that you have good skills when it comes to cards, and now you're engaging in blackjack. Much more decision making involved here. You have to look at the cards that are flipped. You have to consider, what does the dealer have? What do I have? Do I want to hit? Do I want to pass? You also need to consider maybe what you want to wager in each hand. Okay, I'm not a blackjack player, but that's the gist, right? There's a lot more going on there. So now if you have this high skill in card games and there's this higher challenge in blackjack, this is the environment where you might enter that flow state. And therefore, this is the environment where you may be able to pass a lot of time without really thinking about it, right? All of a sudden, you spent hours at the blackjack table, which I guess could be detrimental for other reasons if you're actually wagering money. But you get the idea, right? So to be in a flow state, again, it's this matchup of your skill level and the challenge level that's being presented to you. The most surefire way is when you have a really high skill in a certain area and it's a very challenging task that you're looking to complete, as long as it's not so challenging that there's no way that you're going to do it. If it's so challenging that it's way beyond your skill level, that's just going to make you frustrated, and that's not going to help you to enter the flow state. Okay, so when we think about hours, I just think about this sort of discrepancy between the hours that can feel so long and the ones that can feel so quick. And I think thinking about this flow state and what activities in our lives do we have that get us into flow? Does our work get us into flow? No one's work is going to be 100% those tasks that they have great skills for, and the challenge perfectly matches up and boom, we're in flow state. But I hope that the work that you're engaging in gets you into that state sometimes. I hope you spend a good portion of your time in tasks that feel that way, where the time seems to fly by and you're not thinking about it at all. If that's not the case for you, maybe something to reflect on and consider. How can you get more of those things involved in your day? When I think about an hour, I just think about how important it is to be focused. If you have something specific that you're wanting to accomplish within that hour, can you be absolutely dialed in and focused without other distractions around, without other notifications coming in? And how much can you get done in that hour when that's the case? I find it's a lot. So we want to make sure that we have these hours carved out during the day that are dedicated to true focus time. One technique that could be interesting for you to try is called the Pomodoro technique, and it's for productivity and focus. The idea is just like you might do intervals in the gym, you do intervals for your focus and for your work time over the hour. So you could break this down however you want, but you might set a timer for 50 minutes of true focus time, and then you purposely take the next 10 minutes to get up, walk away, grab something to eat, and let your mind wander. And then after that 10 minutes, you're back on for a 50-minute focus window, and then 10 off again. So you're cycling between these on and off cycles when it comes to your focus. Our brains definitely, especially nowadays with how short our attention spans are, but our brains aren't necessarily wired to just be able to focus really well and be super productive for an infinite amount of time. So having these cycles built in purposefully can be a really great way to structure your day, especially if you have a big project that you might be working on that you know is going to take a lot of time. Okay, so the Pomodoro technique could be an interesting one for you to try if you're thinking about structuring your hours during your workday. And I can't move on from this section about our hour without also mentioning, as a reminder, make sure that you're carving out that hour a day to be active, to move your body in some way. It doesn't actually have to be an hour, but for me, it's just a nice chunk of time to think about. Even if I'm not actually going to the gym, can I take my son out for a walk? Can I do some stretches? Am I at least just up and moving my body for that little chunk of time? Okay, so that's our hours. Let's scale out again and let's think about our days and the way that we're using our time during the day. This makes me think of priorities, the importance of prioritizing during your day. So many of us end up with this task list, and this happens to me, but so many of us end up with this task list that's 20 things long, all the different things that we want to accomplish during the day. Some might be related to family life, some are related to work life, maybe some are miscellaneous. Wow, how challenging is it to approach a day when you have so many different things in your mind? I just want to encourage you to think about really narrowing it down. I like to identify one to two big things that I know that I must accomplish that day. Maybe I have 1 to 2 big things for work, and then I have one other thing outside of work, and I'm like, these are my minimums. These are my must-dos for today. And then once I finish those, that's when I can revisit the list of all the other things. Otherwise, they get pushed. That way my brain is not so muddied with all of these little things that need to get accomplished. And I can feel really good about how focused I am about my top 1 to 2 priorities. There's never going to be enough time in a day to accomplish everything. There just isn't. So the better we can get at identifying the tasks that are of highest importance and or most timely, like maybe you're on a deadline or for whatever reason need to happen sooner rather than later, the better we can get at that skill of identifying those things and focusing on them and letting all the other little things fall away, I think the better and more satisfied we're going to feel at the end of the day. I also encourage you just to focus on those wins and the things that have been accomplished as opposed to all of the things that haven't been. There's always going to be a bunch that haven't been. So why spend time stressing about those and focusing on those? It's really just going to be a recipe for dragging you down, I think. The other thing that I hope that you reflect on is how much of your day is proactive versus how much of your day is reactive. So I have a couple things that I do during my day to kind of like bookend my work day. I have a check-in time that starts off my day where I inventory the calendar for the day and the things that need to be done. And I sort of plan out the blocks in my day. I identify those top 1 to 2 priorities, and I just get my head on straight about what needs to happen when. I found that when I don't do that and I just launch straight into the day and I'm launching right into my inbox and responding to things, that I just end up reacting all day to things that are coming in, things that others are asking of me. And I might miss that window that I really needed to accomplish one of my top priorities for the day. If I didn't plan it out and decide to be proactive about it, that might get missed entirely. So I think that check-in process is really important. And then I also have a check-out process for my workday where I look back at what's been done. Did I get the top 1 to 2 things done? And what do I need to maybe just shift over to my next day's list? Do I have an idea of what to expect the next day and what my top 1 to 2 things are? I might just, clean up any messages, any that I haven't had a chance to respond to, I flag for the next day, and I really make that a hard checkout so that my brain can then transition to thinking about other things. I feel like a lot of this episode so far has been about maximizing your work time and your productivity and your focus. But the reason that that is so important and that I'm so passionate about that is because I think it is in having these practices that we can then check out for other hours of the day and focus on other things. We talked about our 6 pillars of health for performance. Those take time, right? It takes time to get enough sleep and to work your fitness into your life and to have that connection with your loved ones and to prepare the kinds of meals that you want to be eating. So it's so crucial that we maximize that time where we are working and focused and need to get things done in our professional life so that we then have this other time to do a true checkout, to have that quality time during our personal life. I worked for DTS as a fitness educator. The founder of DTS, his name is Kevin Darby. He's someone that I've learned a ton from and really look up to. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is having daily minimums for yourself. And these daily minimums have to do with health, wellness activities, professional goals. And it might be this list of 6 to 10 things where you say, this is the absolute minimum that I want to address for the day. They might be things like at least 5 minutes of moving my body, at least 8 hours of sleep, at least 10 minutes of specific one-on-one time with my children. It might be reading 2 pages a day. They're tiny little things that can touch on those pillars that we talked about, can touch on those big goals that you have for yourself. But it doesn't mean that you have to do it all in one day. It's just that way for you to have your checklist and say, I've at least touched on the things that are important to me, and I'm building in habits for the things that are important to me in my life every single day. And it's never going to be perfect, right? You're never going to do all the things every day. But I think it's a fantastic practice to write out for yourself, what would those 6 to 10 things be for you? What are your 6 to 10 non-negotiables, or as Kevin calls them, daily minimums? Okay, we've talked about moments, living in the present, being able to get yourself into the now, really rooted in those moments that make up the rest of our lives. That's where our life is lived. We've also talked about hours. We talked about flow state and how you can get yourself into a flow state, assessing how many hours you spend in a flow state and how you can really optimize your focus during those hours. Then we also talked about days, thinking about the structure of your day, having maybe a check-in and check-out system for the hours that you're working versus the hours that you're not. We talked about having daily minimums for yourself, things that you know that you want to touch on and accomplish each day. I'm sure you know where we're going next. Let's scale out again and let's talk about your weeks. When I think about weeks, I think about an activity that I've done periodically over the years. I did it most recently with a professional mentor of mine, where you sit down and you have your calendar for the week, Sunday through Saturday, and you block out your ideal week. So where does your time go throughout the week? And that should include everything from sleep to fitness, to work, to meal prep, to errands, any obligations that you have with your kids. Like, it should include all the things. And I think it's a really good exercise because it helps you to get realistic about what you truly have time for and where everything is going to go. This is something that I had to consider deeply as I was launching this podcast. I have a 6-month-old and I have a full-time job in consulting, which I love, and fitness matters to me, and I want to be getting enough sleep, right? Is there enough time in the week to do the things that you're looking to do? And it just helps you get super realistic about what you need to cut back. And just a little caution for you if this is something that you're going to do. Actually, I have 2 cautions for you if this is something you're going to do. One is that you will underestimate the time it takes to do everything. So bake in more free time than you think. Inevitably, the podcast episode that I think is going to take 2 hours to prep for is going to take 4 hours to prep for. And then where are those hours going to come from, right? So, inevitably there's going to be more traffic getting to the gym than you thought, or you're going to putz around and not get into your workout as fast as you thought you would. Like, things just take longer than you think. So if you are going to do this exercise, try to bake that in to whatever it is that you're doing. The other, I don't know if this one's a caution, but this is just a tip for you. After doing this exercise, never once have I actually followed that blocked out schedule that I had for myself during the week. Not once. But that doesn't mean it hasn't been a super valuable exercise. Okay, so I think that there's this balance to be found with everything when it comes to planning. I think there's a balance to be found between understanding the structure and answering those questions for yourself. Is it possible to accomplish everything that I want to accomplish within the week? And all of these different obligations that I'm taking on, and blocking it out. What could that look like, right? I think that structure and planning is really important, and life will never match up to it. But it's still a really valuable exercise because you've tried. And now there's something to emulate. There's a way to think about it. There's a way to approach it. It allows you to have that forethought to think, well, I really want to be going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week. That's important to me. Well, where the heck is that going to fit in, right? And then that come Wednesday, hopefully you've done 1 or 2 of those workouts. It just allows you to kind of have that built-in structure. Maybe it's more of a decision-making framework. It allows you to have a framework to make good decisions and be intentional about the time that you have. If there are things that are really important to you, then block them out and plan for them, and know that the plan is never going to work. I honestly think that both are super important. So it's an exercise that I highly recommend that you do, but then don't get married to it. I never have, but it's an exercise that I think is really crucial. And then I also want you to think during your week, where's the time of nothingness? You have to also have the nothing time. Where's the time to dream, to explore, to discover, to just be? Be with yourself, be with your partner, be with your friends, be with your kids. I think it's important that not everything is planned. And there is that time where you don't feel like, oh my gosh, is there something else that I need to be doing right now? In that true free discovery, just human time. And if you plan out your week and there's no time for that anywhere, I highly encourage you to cut some things back, because we need that contemplative time. It's interesting. I listened to Jeff Bezos do an interview on a podcast recently. And I've been struck by this when I listen to other leaders and CEOs speak as well. But it just hit me again. He leaves hours at the start of his day for just free thinking time, to allow thoughts to percolate in his head, to allow ideas to come to him, to just have this unstructured time, no meetings, no personal obligations. I mean, if I remember correctly, he doesn't start his day until 11 a.m. or something. And all of that morning time is just maybe reading time, or, maybe it's generative time for him. But that space for thought and contemplation, that's where learning happens, which I think is super important for you to feel purposeful and fulfilled. And that's also where creativity happens. And creativity is something that is, I think, very innate to humans, and that I want to do a full podcast episode on to talk about, because I think is a really important way that we feel more fulfilled and in love with our lives. The final thing that I want to leave you with when we're talking about our weeks and sort of allocating our time during the week is that you should not, and it comes back to the very beginning of this episode, right? Don't underestimate the power of very small and quick moments. So it's not always about the quantity of time that you're spending on an activity. Often it's about the quality of time that you're dedicating to an activity. There's research that's been done in parenting specifically that talks about how it's not necessarily the quantity of time that makes for a strong relationship with our children. It's actually the quality of the time that we spend with them that makes for that strong relationship and helps us to feel connected to them and them to feel connected to us. Quality time means spending true time where you're focused on each other, where there's not anything else going on, where you're entering their world, getting down on the floor with them, asking about what it is that they're doing a puzzle with them, playing a game or a sport outside. I don't know, just those things where it's like, it's true energy exchange one-on-one with your child. And if you have multiple kids, it's really important to do this with each of them, right? I don't, but I imagine that hopefully when we have more kids down the line that I'll be carving out this quality time to spend with each one of my kids. It doesn't have to be hours and hours a day. And often it's, if it's distracted time, if you're on your phone, if there's, other things that you're really focused on, if the TV is on and you're just kind of sitting there passively with each other, that's not it, right? That could be a large quantity of time, but that doesn't matter. So I think that that we've learned about the parenting world, I think it also extends to other things. I've always been a huge proponent of journaling. It's something that works really well for me to process through thoughts and process through emotions, but it doesn't take a huge quantity of time. It really just takes a couple minutes of focused time. Like I'll have things during the day that I'm like, man, that is really sitting with me. It's causing a feeling of anxiety, like deep in my stomach. And I take 30 seconds and write out 2 sentences about it, how I feel about it and how I want to approach it. And I feel way better. So that's quality time that I've spent to work through something as opposed to needing to carve out hours and hours a day. The same absolutely applies to your fitness. I talked earlier about carving out that hour for fitness. It does not have to be an hour for it to make a difference. It can be 20, 30 minutes, and that still has a huge impact on your health. So if you do this exercise and you're structuring out your week, don't panic that all of these things need to take up this, hour block of time. It can be quick touches, and that kind of also brings us back to those daily minimums. What could you just do to acknowledge your nutrition or, acknowledge that project that you're working on, or just open up the book and read a little bit, right? Those things still make a huge difference. Okay. We're continuing to scale out when it comes to time. And so let's talk about months next. I think the way that we approach months can be very similar to the way that we approach weeks. This scale isn't so different, right? You could do a similar exercise where you map out your ideal month and what that looks like. But I do have one reflection question for you to think about if you, look back on the past month, or maybe you're planning for the month ahead. Where was the time for the adventure? Where was the time for something novel? I think, speaking from my own experience, I can be a very routine-oriented person, especially now that I'm a parent, but this was the case before I had Leo as well. Weeks can all start to look really similar. I'm not necessarily gonna just book the trip or make the plan for, the exciting thing to go do that's different. I know this because I live in Los Angeles, and the number of things that I still need to go see and do in Los Angeles, different areas that I want to see, is way too long for having lived here for a couple of years. So when I think about a month, I think about having at least one thing that was out of the structure. You took the day off, you took the long weekend, and you did something novel and you did something different. Because I think a lot of people, they do get into that rut of a routine and they look back and they think, what did I even do this year? Right? It feels like all of my time was lost for work. And it's interesting because the way that we remember and the way that we understand time when we are looking back, on the last couple of months or on the last year, it's punctuated by those different and novel events. It's punctuated by the trip. So this is why people felt so bizarre in COVID, because everything was a lot of the same and we didn't have those exciting punches like on our timeline when we looked back to like understand the passage of time. So COVID also became this bizarre time warp where you were like, I can't even measure how much time has passed. It feels like it's slow, but it also feels like it's fast. We just couldn't wrap our minds around it because we didn't have that timeline. Like, so back in March, which was when I took that trip with the friend, and then back in, January was when I went to this concert. Anyways, I think when we look back and we're feeling satisfaction or dissatisfaction with something on this more the scale of months, it's because we may not have taken the time to carve out the adventure to discover something and to do something just different and out of the ordinary. Maybe something to think about. I also think the scale of a month is a great amount of time to do a quick assessment of how the pillars are looking for you. As a reminder from the episode that we did, the 6 pillars of health for performance are sleep, fitness, stress regulation, connection, purpose, and nutrition, right? And some will be stronger at some points than others, but I think it's a really good amount of time that month to look back and say, okay, which pillars were really strong this month and which do I maybe want to lean into for next month? Let's zoom out again. And now we're on the scale of a year. A year is a cool amount of time because it's enough time that you can look back and there could be real shifts that have been made in your identity, in your behavior, in your performance, whether that's personally or professionally or in fitness or whatever it might be. That's a large enough time scale that real change can be seen, right? You look back and you think, man, last year at this time, I felt really different than I do this year at this time. And that can be a really good thing, or it cannot be such a great thing. That's up to you to reflect on for yourself. But a year is also short enough that it still feels like it's within recent enough memory. Like we can still kind of get back to how we felt at this time 1 year ago. So I just think it's this really cool amount of time. I think that setting intentions for yourself each year can be really powerful. This is the year of motherhood. That was my last year, right? I got pregnant in January and I had my son in September. And so it was the year of transition through pregnancy and then early postpartum. It was the year of becoming a mom. And, maybe not as much happened professionally during that year, or, I wasn't like, my fitness looked different. A lot of it looked the same, but it felt different. And the way I approached my nutrition felt different. And all of the other things were just a little bit different because that was the main intention. Like that was the thing. There was nothing else more important to focus on last year. It was absolutely not the time to launch a podcast, right? I was just like in that transition time. So having, this is the year that I am going to feel this way, or I lean into this thing that's happening in my life. I think it's a cool thing to do, right? Give years themes for yourself. Like I remember the year that I really leaned into sleep. It was the year of sleep. I remember the year that I first started seeing myself as an educator and a leader. And it was just the year of stepping into leadership for myself and gaining confidence in my thoughts and my ability to share them and the impact that I could have on others, and in that also that they could have on me. It was the year of leadership, right? So I think it's a really interesting practice, and it might be hard while you're in it, but I think the more that we do it and we get really thoughtful about it, we can do it proactively. We say, I just sense this is going to be the year for this thing. This is going to be the year that I start shutting things off and killing my notifications during the evening and just like being with my family. Or this is going to be the year of travel and discovery. This is going to be the year that I start to love myself and I, get really calm and good with just sitting with myself in this moment. I don't know. These are just random ideas, but I think it's a powerful practice when we think about our years. Our last zoom out expands us to the scale of passing years and decades. And I don't know, there's something about this amount of time that just makes me start to feel sentimental, because like a lot of the timeline has become really fuzzy when you look back. Like you can look back at something that happened 5 years ago and be like, at what point of the year did that happen? Like, how did that feel again? Right? You've lost a lot of the specifics. Those big things that have happened, the big life events, big discoveries, probably still punctuate the timeline. But when we think back on years or decades, it's really cool to look back and think, wow, look how much I've changed. Look how far I've come. Look how much I've grown. Look at the things that were important to me 5 or 10 years ago that aren't part of my life now. Or, look at these values that I've fully integrated into my life that I didn't have back then, right? This is where we can really see those like big shifts, big evolutions, and big themes that make up, our full life, that are going to make up our full lifetime. When we think of years, decades, and, just kind of like looking back on our life, I think one thing I want to leave you with is just this reminder that when people are delivered news that their days are numbered and maybe they didn't expect it, right? You get that horrible news that you may have a limited amount of time left. How much do our priorities and our behaviors change? How many people quit the job? How many people move somewhere else? How many people start traveling and seeing the world, right? All of these things that they've been waiting for someday, all of a sudden, when time is compressed and condensed, they start doing them now. I just think it's so important to remember that even if it doesn't feel like it right now, our days are numbered. And in a lot of ways, we are slaves to this finite amount of time that's going to make up our lives. And so what are you waiting for someday to do? What's going to happen when the time is right? How can you make that decision that maybe the right time is now, or maybe the right time is sooner rather than later? Because, man, we get into that routine of sameness and just focusing on the next thing. And we create these lives where we have a ton of obligations and where certain things have become the norm, and it becomes hard to break out of. So when we think about years, decades, a lifetime, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for someday for? And can that happen today instead? Can you put the pieces in place for it to happen today instead? Time is wild. because, again, it's something that we measure and we try so hard to manage and control. We're never very far away from a clock. And when we are, I think we feel a little bit lost and confused. It's a weird feeling, right? We're never so far away from a clock. We always kind of have a sense. We're trying to measure the time. We have our calendars that dictate our lives, all this planning that's done within this structure, these confines of these measured things. And our clocks and calendars, they all point at this thing that we're talking about, this force that is time. But none of them are time. They cannot quite capture the essence of what exists behind the clocks and behind the calendars. That's the thing that's experienced. It's experienced in moments which zoom out to minutes, which zoom out to hours, which zoom out to days, weeks, years, decades, and a lifetime. And it might sound like a negative thing to have lost track of time, but I think that losing track of time and not thinking about how many minutes, hours have passed is not a loss at all. And it's actually the best way that we can experience time. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Casey Zavaleta podcast. If you are organizing an event that's oriented around health and wellness, or you're booking corporate wellness sessions for your company, and you're interested in having me come and speak at that event, please reach out at caseyzavaleta.com/contact. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, I would hugely appreciate if you could take 10 seconds and leave a 5-star rating on the show. I would even more hugely appreciate if you could take 30 seconds and leave a quick review on the show. It helps to spread the word to more listeners about the podcast. If you would like to receive notifications about episode drops, or if you're interested in actionable insights related to podcast content, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter. You can do that at caseyzavaleta.com/subscribe. Okay, everyone, that's it from me this week. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you back next Wednesday for the next episode of the show.